ladies and gentlemen, and welcome into the Ancient Andes podcast. It's Friday, November 5th, 2021. And this week on the Ancient Andes podcast, our special guest is Scott Lite. We are going to be talking about the different sacred plant medicines that have been in use throughout the region for hundreds and in some cases, thousands of years. We also will be talking about his expedition to Pusharo. These are some very obscure and mysterious petroglyphs in the Amazon. Scott was trained as an herbalist at the Appalachia School of Holistic Herbalism. He is an associate of the Botanical Preservation Corps, and he has extensive experience in Peru collecting information and medicinal, edible, and sacred plants throughout the Andes and the Amazon. Scott opened the Ethnobotanical Conservation Organization for Ethnoco, which is a company based in Peru that leads expeditions and sells cultural wares. His website is here, ethnoco.com. I'll also post links for Scott on my Ancient Andes Facebook page. A couple of house cleaning things. So I'm in the basement here where I'm at right now, and you might be hearing some movement above me in the podcast. I'm hoping that it'll be minimal. And I think there might be a little bit of feedback or some static in the second part of our podcast. But other than that, please feel free to support this podcast through Spotify, iTunes, or however you guys are listening. I really appreciate your support, and I hope you really enjoy this podcast. Thank you all for being here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to bring our special guest today, Scott Lite. Scott, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, man, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Scott, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and how you got involved in Peru?
Sure. So my name is Scott Lite, L-I-T-E. You guys are welcome to look me up on Facebook. And I run the company called the Ethnobotanical Conservation Organization, or Ethnoco for short. I started going to Peru in 2010 with an organization called the Botanical Preservation Corps. They go around the world collecting plants and seeds and cultural knowledge about ethnobotanicals. So yeah, I've been going to Peru for about 12 years now. I usually spend anywhere from 6 to 12 months in Peru every year. Especially try to concentrate my time during the dry season, which is, runs from about April to September. If you're planning on going to Peru, I would definitely recommend doing it in that time, just because from September or October to March, it's really rainy and it's much harder to get around and move around. But I study ethnobotany and anthropology. I am not an actual ethnobotanist. I just play one in real life. So I don't have a degree or anything.
Yeah, you're like me with the archaeology thing.
Exactly. Yeah. But maybe I could explain what ethnobotany is for the people that don't know. So ethnobotany is the study of the relationship between plants and people. So an ethnobotanical is any plant that people use for any reason. So it could be anything from potatoes to tea and coffee to ayahuasca, San Pedro, cannabis, psychoactive plants, but it's any plant that people use for any reason. I usually don't include ornamentals because I think they're not useful besides being pretty, which I suppose is useful. But yeah, ethnobotany is the study of the relationship between plants and people, and it's how different cultural groups perceive plants. So the way that, the Machinga people in the Peruvian Amazon perceive tobacco is different than the way modern American culture perceives tobacco. For the Machinga, it's a sacred, important plant that's used to connect with the spirit world. And for, most modern Americans, it's just a thing. It's cigarettes, you smoke it, it gives you cancer, that kind of thing.
It only has, real relevance for sacred uses here with the native peoples, and there's so few these days. So correct.
Right, so I would consider that a different cultural group, although it is influenced by modern American culture. So yeah, ethnobotany is just the way people perceive plants and how plants are used, basically.
Scott, how did you get involved in ethnobotany? What really sparked your interest? Did you have a personal experience, or had you always had a fascination with plants?
Well, so my dad was a forestry major. He um, he was always a woodsman and a hunter, and he, from a time when I was very young, he took me out in the forest and showed me different plants, mostly trees is his thing. And he always took me hunting and fishing, so I always loved nature. And then when I was about 15 years old, I started I I smoked cannabis, and I was like, oh my God, there's these magic plants out there. Not long after that, I used mushrooms and San Pedro for the first time when I was around 15. Um, and then I just sat down one day and I Googled like psychoactive plants, and that sort of just opened up. That was the intro to ethnobotany. So I want to be clear that ethnobotany is not just about psychoactive or psychedelic plants, but that was my initial interest and sort of introduction. So that is what opened up the world of ethnobotany to me after my initial introduction from my dad and just being out in nature.
Awesome, Scott. Thank you, man. And please tell us, Scott, what are some of the most important plant medicines that you would say exist in South America? I know the list is huge. I just looked at it on Google, and it's like unbelievable how many different plants there are that have different uses.
Yeah. South and Central America have a plethora of especially psychoactive plants. Of course, there is an almost infinite amount of useful plants, but if we're talking specifically about the sacred or psychoactive plants, I would say you have, there's San Pedro or Wachuma, which is a cactus that contains mescaline as its main active principle. There is ayahuasca, which is actually two different plants typically brewed into a tea. The main plant, Banisteriopsis caapi, the ayahuasca vine, is it's a liana that grows in the Amazon. And then usually added to that is chacruna or Psychotria viridis, which contains the dimethyltryptamine, DMT. That is an extremely important plant in all of the Amazonian river basin. Then you have tobacco, which is very important. You have coca. You have Brugmansia, which is known here in the U.S. as angel's trumpets. It's a white or yellow hanging flower.
I think so when I was in Colombia, they called it burundunga or something like that.
Yeah, burundunga, right. I think it is. Yeah. There's also another name for it, like borrachero or something similar, which means to get you drunk.
That sounded like my nickname in Cusco for a minute there.
There you go. Brugmansia can be very dangerous. I'll put a little note in people need to be very careful with that one. The other ones I mentioned are pretty safe. I mean, you don't just take them all willy-nilly, but Brugmansia can be pretty dangerous.
Okay.
And then one more that not many people know about or think about is yopo or sabel, which is Anadenanthera peregrina and Anadenanthera colubrina, which is a seed. Excuse me. It's in the Fabaceae family. And it's sort of these large trees that make a bean kind of thing. Inside the bean, there's these seeds. And the natives, such as the Yanomami or various other groups, will take these seeds and toast them and then mix them with ashes or lime, sort of a basic substance, a base, and turn it into a powder and make a snuff out of it. And that is a entheogenic or psychedelic snuff. So this was once used from the Caribbean all the way almost to Patagonia. It was one of the largest and most ancient entheogenic cults. It was extremely widespread at one point, and now it is almost extinct. The usage is almost extinct. So that's an interesting one that a lot of people forget about.
Scott, is yopo the same as rapé or no?
No. So rapé is, well, okay. So rapé is a generic term for snuff, for anything that you blow up your nose or snort up your nose. Typically rapé is tobacco, Nicotiana rustica or Nicotiana tabacum, and it has ashes of various plants added to it. It may have other ingredients. So you could have a rapé that has yopo in it,
Okay.
but it usually, especially in this sort of modern usage of the word, it means a tobacco snuff, whereas yopo is made from the seeds of the Anadenanthera plant.
Fascinating. Scott, can you talk a little bit about the cultures that used these substances? Can we dive into that?
Sure. So, as I was talking about yopo, sabel, there's a lot of archaeological evidence in various parts of Peru and various parts of South America, of them finding snuff paraphernalia, these sort of tubes and trays that people use to snort this stuff. One of the prominent sites, well, there was many sites on the coast where it was found. I believe they also found it in Chivin de Huantar, which is, if you looked at a map of Peru and you stuck your finger right in the middle, it's around there, central Peru, near the modern day city of Huaraz. But Chivin de Huantar goes back literally thousands of years. I think the first archaeological evidence of people being there is around, I want to say 1800 BC. Look that up yourself.
I was going to say 3000 BC, so I think it's in that ballpark. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I was thinking it was 3000. Yeah, maybe you're right. Anyway,
maybe you're right. Maybe it's 3000 from now, but yeah, either way, right. It's around that time.
It's very, very old. So in Chivin de Huantar, as I said, they found paraphernalia of various for using various psychoactive or entheogenic substances. Let me real quick, I'll define what two terms are that we'll be using. So I just said entheogen. So an entheogen is, it has the word related to the word theology, theos, in there. So an entheogen is something that makes you have a divine experience or connects you with God. So an entheogenic plant is used to create a connection with the divine or to create a feeling of the sacred. So that's an entheogen. And then the other term is shamanism. So that is actually a word from Siberia. I can't remember which, I want to say it's the Tsungu people, but I can't remember who came up with that term, but it was actually taken by anthropologists and put into English. And a shaman or a shamanic religion is a religion that has a direct connection with the divine or uses ecstatic states. So, whereas I think I believe it's Wade Davis that has a great quote from one of his informants, I think in Haiti, sorry. He says that the informant says that you go, talking about Christians, you go into church to talk about God, but we go into the temple to talk directly to God. So shamanism is a religion that has a direct connection with the divine through ecstatic states.
Fantastic. Thank you, Scott. And let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about these cultures. So we talked about Chavin de Huantar. Is that how you pronounce it? Okay.
Yep. Chavin de Huantar.
And they were primarily using Huachuma, correct? Or San Pedro?
Yeah, I think that's what they're really famous for, is the San Pedro or Huachuma, which is a Trichocereus species. It's been moved in the Echinopsis genus more recently, but there's a lot of people that disagree with that. Anyway, so that's what they're famous for. There's carvings of their fanged god holding San Pedro. But they also were using, as we noted before, most likely Wilca, Yopo, Sabel. Wilca is another name for the Anadenanthera snuff. It means sacred. And they were using probably Brugmansia, Toe, Floripondio, and they possibly were using ayahuasca and other psychoactive substances as well. But the main archaeological evidence we have from Chivin de Huantar is for San Pedro, which, as we said earlier, is a mescaline-containing cactus, the same principal ingredient as peyote.
Here we can actually see images or depictions of deities